Greetings, universe. Well, the American Psychiatric Association meets indoors inside the Javits Center to discuss their plans for spreading psychiatry throughout the world. We are here bringing you the alternative, non-mainstream story about mental health and psychiatry. My guest today is Kermit Cole, who started off as a film director and is now a marriage and family therapist and founding editor of madinamerica.com, a webzine started in 2012, which serves as a catalyst for rethinking psychiatric care in the United States and abroad. Inspired by the open dialogue model in Finland, Kermit works in treatment teams with severely traumatized and psychotic clients and has said that the best way to sustainably resolve the problems we confront in ourselves is to focus on the problems between people rather than looking for something wrong with people that we can fix. Thanks for joining today, Kermit.
Very glad to be with you.
Right. So the first question I always like to ask people is what their why is, what their motivation is. So can you tell me a little bit about why you started to get involved in mental health?
Well, if we're talking about why I got involved, we can get back to that. I'd like to talk about what motivates me now.
Sure. Yeah. Let's go with that.
Yeah. And there's a reason, and you'll understand that I like to focus now on just the fact that of just making the world that I want to live in, and on a daily basis, trying to live and be and make the world a little more like the world that I hope for it to be. I got into it out of anger, sadness over things and confusion over things that I'd seen happen to people that I cared about that didn't make sense to me. I grew up hearing words like schizophrenia and borderline and character disorder thrown around, applied to people that I was close to. And the best I can say is that it certainly didn't help. The outcomes were not good. So somewhere in adulthood, I realized actually that what I had been trying to do as a director, what I loved doing as a director was starting from what felt like an intellectual place, since that was really the only place that I felt comfortable in. I didn't feel comfortable enough. I didn't feel that I had anything to offer in terms of heart, or I didn't feel that I knew how to love anybody because I was not shown that I could. And so I thought I can start from an intellectual place, but the directing ended in a place where I felt like, all the thinking that I'd put in ended in an act of generosity where I gave it over to actors in a way that they could then take that and perform their own act of generosity, which was to empathize with the characters so much that they became them and became a new person and opened up parts of themselves that they hadn't been able to. And when I could succeed in all those things, especially the part of actors or people in documentaries opening up parts of themselves that they either didn't know were there or hadn't been able to access, then that was an exciting moment, and that the audience would be on the edge of their seats. But then at a certain point I realized I didn't feel comfortable doing it in fiction or with actors. I wanted to do it in real lives and with people who were actually struggling. And then when I got involved in that, went back to school, got involved in that, eventually realized that what it was that I was drawn to was, at first was people who were being called schizophrenic. And as I worked with them, realized that I really liked them and just found had a feeling of connection. And gradually realized also that I didn't really believe this label that was being applied to them, as I realized that they had all been traumatized in ways that were not being talked about or addressed, or that even if you tried to raise it as meaningful, it was dismissed by the people in control. And gradually came to realize that it had been trauma all along in my life, that it had people who'd been called schizophrenic and borderline were people who had been traumatized. And so I wanted to then work with, the joke I would make was I want to work with people who are being called schizophrenic. No, that's not how I put it. I said, I want to work with people who are traumatized, especially when they're being called something else. And then I found that if I was able to basically shift the frame, either just with the person one-on-one, or ideally with a whole treatment situation, if I could shift the frame from a focus on a disease to a focus on and dissociation and the other things that, I've said to result, understood the result from that, people got better. People who'd been told that they had to stay in treatment their whole life and stay on medication and shouldn't really aspire to hold a job, got better. And a lot of them are now at the top of their profession. Some of them are working in the hospitals or have worked in the hospitals that they had previously been locked up in. And, other people who've been told that, their best aspiration might be a part-time job at McDonald's are now at the top of their profession in the world. So, of course, so for a long time I was motivated by anger at what I perceived to be all these lives that could have just been lost without anybody ever knowing that it didn't need to be that way. And it was very frustrating to see that people walk away from the diagnosis, walk away from the treatment that they've been told would be forever. And they had, some of them, it was like running an underground railway. It was like people who actually literally picked up, moved states to leave their history behind. And some of them even changed their names to leave behind the lives that they've been told they had to have. And I see that a lot, people changing their names, actually, but some of them actually changed their names legally in order to leave it all behind. And so yeah, for me, it was a lot of despair and anger, fury. I've had my days of storming through the streets and literally in fury at the power that somebody with a particular degree might have to just ignore or dismiss what people like I, who's actually spent a lot of time with our clients, had to say. But anger can get you into trouble too, and it's hard to sustain. And so now I since working in the ways that I've worked, I've been lucky enough to work, and then learning about open dialogue and learning that leading my partner and I into getting credentialed as family therapists, specifically so that we would have a credentialed base from which to work with the kinds of situations that we wanted to, which were situations where we would prevent younger people especially, and older people too sometimes, from getting caught in that drain of being diagnosed and psychiatrized and dying, as we have seen in our lives. Now that I've gotten into that and I've learned that there's a place you can work in that space between people, and it can be joyous. And even I like to joke. It's like I almost don't even hold it against people whether they're psychotic or not. I mean, it's just so great to work in that space of relationships that we work with a whole range, and which is and we're usually working with at least one or two people who have been caught in that, who've been called psychotic or schizophrenic, or on the precipice of being called that. And we can sometimes manage to get that train onto a different track. Sometimes very gently if we get there soon enough. But then also, sometimes we're working with couples and families where it may not be being called psychotic, but if we do the work right, I feel pretty comfortable saying we're preventing it, maybe in a future generation. But the greatest thing I can say about it is that it's just so fundamental to being human. And we lose track of that. As soon as we start calling somebody a label or deciding that we know who they are and that they can't change, then we take them out of the running to be in relationships. Because relationships are about evolving and interacting and growing together. And as soon as you start differentiating somebody out from that, then we're growing apart rather than growing together. And so, I mean, I guess the greatest thing I can say to, doctors and psychiatrists is, I've worked with a lot of you who felt absolutely sure about what you've been taught. And I don't necessarily mean to tell you that you're wrong or that what you've been taught was wrong. All I need to say is that in a lot of those situations where I've been told that people were, had a biological whatnot, when we shifted it into a different place, everybody was happy. Everybody, including the doctors. So let's give that a try whenever we can.
All right, now you mentioned open dialogue, and when I've read some of your work, you've talked about incorporating open dialogue. Can you tell me a little bit about what open dialogue is and where you heard about it and how you've incorporated it into your therapy practice?
Well, open dialogue is it's the default standard response of the catchment area around the city of Tornio, Finland. It's one of 7 catchment areas, 7 I think, in Finland, that when they started an experiment about a little over 30 years ago to come up with better ways of responding to a mental health crisis than they had at the time, in the sense that their hospitals were overflowing, they were over capacity, and the rate of schizophrenia diagnosis was the worst in Europe. I know people like to say that schizophrenia has this, consistent incidence around the world, but that's not true at all. It does range greatly. Correlating with various, I'll just say, for shorthand, short socioeconomic factors are the biggest impact. But that's dismissed as if there's a standard rate, but there isn't. There's a big variance. And the best example of that is when they over the years developed this different way of working, open dialogue, they actually succeeded in reducing their incidence of schizophrenia to the lowest in Europe, practically eliminating it. What that means is, because they use this open dialogue approach to all mental health crises, from somebody being lonely or suicidal to anything. Anytime somebody picks up a phone, and calls into the municipality and says, something's happening that I'm afraid of or about, this is their response. They respond, and in shorthand, it is responding with a team of therapists who respond with a systemic, or sometimes called, family therapy approach. But systemic really means looking at all the relationships that matter in a person's life, or in this group of people, and the communication and what's understood and what's misunderstood, and expectations and dilemmas that people have, over time not been able to manage, and they've become overwhelming, and they've reached the point of behaving or speaking in strident or bizarre ways, or ceasing to speak because the ways that they've tried to speak before haven't worked, or whatever's going on, something traumatic or abusive happening, or whatever it is. And in these situations, people end up behaving in ways that other people don't understand because they don't know the thing that's causing it, and the person has lost the capacity to meaningfully express it, or had that capacity, in some cases beaten out of them, or not beaten, but no bad intention on anybody's part, but just situations exist where people can't get their needs met, can't get their needs heard. And I think it's not hard for any of us to imagine going crazy in that kind of situation. And so anyway, so that's their response. That's their default response to all crises, is the assumption that something like that might be happening. and that there might be something medical going on too. There's this is psychiatry. What psychiatry looks like in Finland, in Tornio, in this area. This is what it looks like. They respond with the assumption that it might be something interpersonal, social. It might also be medical. I mean, people have, when I get a cold, I act delirious. When I get a flu, I act psychotic. If I have a thorn in my foot that nobody knows about, I'm going to act pretty crazy. I mean, that's just, there can be tumors, there can be blood sugar, there can be anything. What I can say from having worked in schizophrenia research at a pretty respected university, Harvard, is that even the researchers that I worked with eventually said, yeah, I don't think schizophrenia is either it's not what we thought it was, or it doesn't exist. And now some of the top schizophrenia researchers in the world, usually when they retire, say, yeah, I think maybe we got this all wrong. Anyways, but your question was about open dialogue. So then this brings me right back. Now in Tornio, having had this experience, what they say is what they call schizophrenia. If you ask them, sometimes they'll say, if you ask them what they think schizophrenia is, what they'll say is it's failed treatment. It's when somebody has had an initial episode of what we are calling psychosis, because we don't understand yet why they're doing what they're doing. But they've become so successful at ameliorating these situations within 6 months, that the consequence of that is that they do not, therefore, at 6 months, meet criteria for schizophrenia diagnosis, which, of course, that's the dividing line. It's not like there's some blood test or CAT scan or anything. The dividing line is 6 months of not understanding why somebody's behaving this way and failing to resolve it. So that's what they do in Finland. They respond with this they show up as a municipality. They say, it's as if they had a uniform on. It's like, we're the city, we're here to help. All respect to Ronald Reagan. And I think that has the effect of people in crisis saying, thank you, and they're like it. And I think a large percentage of the population at this point has had some form of contact with this process. They trust it, they like it, they understand it, and it actually has the consequence that down into the roots of society, down into like school counselors, and they know this is the approach, and this is the approach they take. They don't get freaked out when somebody's, they don't immediately think, oh, this person's psychotic, this person's schizophrenic, they need medication. They think we got to address what's going on. So a lot of times situations don't even get into the quote unquote psychiatric system, or actually the not quote psychiatric system of Finland. They just don't get there because people know that this is what's going to do it themselves. So it's been a big cultural change. And it's very funny here, because I think if you go to anybody who's in any kind of significant authoritative position scientifically here, at least behind closed doors, they'll say, yeah, we don't know anything. We don't really have any answers. This stuff we've been doing doesn't work. You still get some of them publicly who won't really say that. And I think if you talk to a general member of the public, they'll say, yeah, schizophrenia is a brain disease, and believe it. They don't know that the science doesn't support that.
Sure. Let me ask you, you wrote an article that was titled, or you were reporting on an article that was titled 20-year data that shows antipsychotics do not reduce psychosis. Can you tell me a little, I don't know if maybe this was a couple of years ago that you wrote this on Mad in America's site.
That would have been the Martin Harrow study, right?
Martin Harrow, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what that study was all about and what it tells people?
Yeah. One quick important piece of data from Open Dialogue is that their 5-year outcomes, since we're talking outcomes now, their 5-year outcomes for first episode psychosis are in the mid 80% positive outcomes, meaning at work, at school, having a family, basically pretty much out of treatment. that's none of these things are absolute, and some people take a little medication, whatever, but most people don't. And that, just on the face of it, is far better than anything we're doing here. So whatever you believe or don't believe about open dialogue, if you believe that that statistic is true, you need to understand what they might be doing that's different. So I'll throw that out to any doubters out there. I accept doubt, but unless you're calling the good researchers of Torneo liars, I think you got to at least give a little respect to these 80+% outcomes. But anyway, you asked about Martin Harrow. Martin Harrow's really interesting. They started. This was a few years ago. The 20-year outcome study came out maybe 5 years ago now. So they would have started their research 25 years ago. They started with people who had a first episode of psychosis, and they were studying also people with a range of things, borderline, not borderline, bipolar, etc. And it was prospective, naturalistic study, no control group. So, that's what it is. But it was a naturalistic study, meaning things that are actually happening. And the bottom line of what they found over 20 years is that the people who basically, the bottom line is the people who got on medication and stayed on it had worse outcomes at 20 years. And that's irrespective of the initial severity of their diagnosis or the prognosis that they've been given. So the people who had been very extreme, very ill, had been not given much hope, if they got off the meds, the ones who got off the meds were in much better shape 20 years later. And in terms of functional outcome, in most respects, in all respects. And the people who initially didn't have such a severe diagnosis, didn't have such a severe prognosis, if they got on the meds and stayed on them, they had a worse outcome. So that was pretty stark, pretty clear. The precipice was at about 4 years. For the first 2 years, that was not the case. For the first 2 years, people taking the medication appeared to be doing better. It was between 2 and 4 years that the lines crossed, but most research doesn't go that long for all kinds of reasons. Obviously, funding. Obviously, who has an interest in doing that. One of the reasons is people don't stay in studies. So one of the things that really differentiated the Harrow study is that Harrow, who I will throw in here, I met him, and he told me that he used to play Bobby Fischer to a draw. He said he's several times. You know Bobby Fischer?
Bobby Fischer, the chess player?
The at one time best chess player in the world. Yeah. He used to play Bobby Fischer regularly to a draw. So we're not talking. Yeah. So we're talking about a guy who's got some resources. I met him when he was quite old. That mind was really in there, and really sharp. And anyway, so yeah, we're not talking about a slouch here. And so he, just as an example, the people who disappeared from his study, he hired detectives to find them. And he was not backing down. He had very high retention rate in his studies. And some of the people that disappeared were people who they didn't want to have anything to do with their prior, with their prior diagnosis. Some of them are actually, he never told me their names, but they are well-known people in their fields, names clearly that I would know. He knew that I would know them. But, so he's protecting that, obviously. But they just, and then of course now, I've been in this field long enough where there has been a bit of a shift where some of the very prominent professionals in the field are now finally coming out and acknowledging that in their early years they'd been locked up in hospitals, et cetera, for some of them for years. Marsha Linehan, is one of the biggest ones, who's made that come out of the closet, come out of the ward, come out of the, whatever, the locked room.
Medicine cabinet.
Yeah. And but another great one actually is William James, commonly referred to as the founder of American psychology. It's come to light that he spent a good part of his 20s in a hospital, and that one of the cases that he would write about was himself. He didn't, that's been shown to be true. And so I guess I'm just saying, and I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm just saying these lines that get drawn between who is and who isn't, and they're just not real. And I put it this way. I hope I'm not being too rambly, but I like to say it seems to make an effect. I can make anybody psychotic in 72 hours. And I know exactly. Talk to the CIA; they know how to do that. I know the tricks. I know how to do it, and it's just to say it's all. We all have that line that we can cross, and between here and psychotic, there's border. There's bipolar. There's any one of these things. And I also like to say to people, if I'm trying to make the sale for why family therapy could potentially address psychosis, I like to say, well, who makes you psychotic? No, I don't say that. No, I say who in your life makes you crazy? People think about it for about 3 seconds and they say, all right, I get it. Yeah.
So let me ask you this about, you've mentioned trauma a few times, and kind of the trauma, trauma being the cause of these experiences for people in this distress. Can you give an idea of what that, what types of things can be traumatic? Because I feel like when some people hear trauma, they think, oh, does that own, there's certain things that come to mind, but it's actually like a pretty broad range of possibilities. Can you talk about like all the different types of things that people might consider to be traumatic in their lives?
Thank you for that question. That's perfect. Because it's a dangerous word. And first thing I want to say is, yes, trauma can be one of the causes of psychosis, and we can get into by that much broader meaning of the word than we immediately tend to think of. We immediately tend to think of some image of somebody doing something to somebody, or something happening to somebody. And I think actually what I'm really talking about is something much more subtle that has to do with the things that challenge our sense of self, our sense of safety, the sense of being able to function, in the world. And that can be, for a child, that can be as much as being ignored. That for a child, for a young enough child, being ignored is life-threatening, and literally life-threatening. Because we know out of infants coming out of orphanages in Romania where they weren't touched, many of them just die. Primates, monkeys that aren't touched, that don't have affection, die. They cannot self-regulate, even when they have access to food, even when they have what they need. It's in our nature. We are so interdependent with others that our bodies cannot regulate themselves without interaction. And so, there's videos you can find online of, where they've done experiments of mothers ignoring their children, shifting from interacting with them to ignoring them. And within 30 seconds, the child is so distraught that it's unbearable. And it's not hard to see how, a few years of that at a young enough age, you're going to get somebody who is less than completely functional as an adult. And the biology of that is clear. I don't rule out biology of any of this. It's fascinating to look at how ion channels affect mood. The big thing is not oversimplify. So like in the open dialogue approach, everybody's at the table. You got psychologists, you got social workers, you got addictions people, whoever's relevant, and you have a psychiatrist who can look and say, well, this medication may be helpful in this case for this reason. What's different about open dialogue is that their rationale is different. It's about helping somebody manage the crisis in the immediate sense and then get off the meds. And it's not about being anti-med. It's just a different understanding of why they're helpful. So anyway, so trauma can be, dad not coming home on time. It can be somebody saying, I love you, as if it's a threat. It can be mom being depressed. These things can be debilitating to a child, are debilitating to a child, and to humans. to everybody. I mentioned again that the client I was talking to this morning, but we can come back to that. But so I'm saying, when I say trauma, I think the first thing is like I ask people to do is get out of their minds the images that they think I need, because it's really much more. I'm talking about the things that aren't there. The close, real-time connection that helps people have the capacity to have resources, have resilience, know that they can turn to somebody, know that they can say what's going on, and that it will be heard, and it will be real, and it will be something that you can work on together and find your ways together into the future. If you don't, a child turns to a mother and says, my dad, my brothers, a neighbor is doing something to me that I'm confused about. And if mother says, no, they aren't, what's that kid going to say the next time? They're not going to say anything. And what they're being told is your well-being doesn't matter. Your sense of confusion doesn't matter. Versus having somebody, anybody, a neighbor, that you can say, something's happening, and the neighbor says, I get it, that's real, you're not crazy. That can make all the difference. I'm talking research. The research says, even people experiencing the worst physical traumas, if they have somebody that says, that's real, you're not crazy, it's not your fault, those are the people that get better. So when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about something much bigger than any physical event. I'm talking about, are we fully engaged in the grand experiment of being human together? And anything less than that is, something to aspire to do better than. And then also, but I also want to quickly mention, because I tend to talk about the psychosocial aspect of it, I just want to give full acknowledgement to the physical realities. Like I said, a tumor, a blow to the head, I don't know, being different, being somehow different than your dominant culture, which is a physical thing. I think this has changed over time, and hopefully it's changing, but certainly at different times in our culture, being gay was traumatizing, full on. One thing people don't realize about the whole Beautiful Mind story, that guy, what's his name?
I know who you're talking about. It was John Nash.
Yeah. Well, one really important detail that's in the book, but nowhere in the film, is that he was gay. Maybe that's not even the right term. Put it this way. When he was a teenager, he had sex with older men. Okay, whatever we call that. In the South, in the 40s, which, at the time, that was lethal. That was not a safe thing to do. So I don't in any way dismiss or diminish the beautiful relationship that he had with his wife. But it's complicated. And he was tortured when he was in college, tortured by fellow students. We would call it torture now. People would go to jail for what they did. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, that was a physical reality of himself that caused him trauma. being Black, being an immigrant, being, so I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too discursive here. But, I just, I started out by trying to say the medical part, really important. Drugs, I'm all for them. In the sense of, throughout history, humans have used substances to learn that they can think and feel differently. And I myself have benefited from doing that, both with recreational and prescribed drugs. I'm not telling anybody else to do it. And I've personally had some positive experiences where I took a drug, in college, like you do, and I learned things. And I'm grateful for it. But I'm not an addictive person. I'm not a person that's drawn to do something like that again. I tried some I tried Prozac when it came out because I was very depressed. And I said, interesting, that was helpful. Don't want to stay on it, and I got off of it. And I feel very lucky about that. Some people, I think I also had some incidents of violence that were a direct result of taking that drug. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I broke some bones. So now I believe I know why that happened, because at the time I didn't. But nobody forced me to do any of that. So nobody talked me into it. I chose to do it, and I chose to get off of it. So it's a different thing than other people who get kind of browbeaten or coerced and end up doing it for a long time, or voluntarily do it for a long time under what I think are false pretenses. Anyway, again, I'm rambling, so stop me.
It's all right. Let's talk about Mad in America. How did Mad in America get started?
Well, just one of the great pieces of luck in my life was, so I was in school, as I mentioned, trying to make sense out of things. I heard, this is back in 2002, I heard Robert Whitaker on the radio, local NPR, talking about the book he had coming out. I heard what I thought was him being sort of backed into a corner by the interviewer. The interviewer was saying, so are you pro-med or anti-med? Take a stand. And Bob actually remember it, that he said, well, it's really not so simple. But the interviewer said, I need a basically, give me simple. He said, well, then if I had to choose, I'd say no, man. That's how I remember it. But anyway, I read the book, picked the book up, read it overnight, literally couldn't put it down. I like to say it reads like a detective story in which the mystery is, can we be this stupid? And I won't give away the ending. It's yes, yeah, we are in fact that stupid. But I got to the back cover and noticed he lived in Cambridge, where I was living, where I was going to school. So I called him up, and it turns out he's just a great guy. And in the what is it now, 16 years since, and he's never failed to continue, impress me more than he has before. And just a decent guy he is. I just feel like I met one of the great heroes to me of our times. And then at the time, I realized he was running around the world, speaking anytime anybody asks for free. And I was like, look, let me pick up your laundry or something, anything to help out. And then when he decided to start a website, he called me. And I happened to be free because I'd been working someplace. Well, actually, the prelude to him calling me was I was working someplace that I'd gone to work for because I thought, because they were publicly billed as being, the sort of great alternative. And I found they were not really the alternative that I'd hoped them to be. So I told him I can't do this anymore. I can't, I either have to do something radical or I can't do incremental. I have to do something really radical or get out. sell aluminum siding or whatever. And he, so it was pretty shortly after that, he called me up and said, do you want to do the website? And I said, I will do that for as long as you will let me. Turned out I did it for as long as I could until I burned out. I mean, I'm still involved, but I eventually just needed to move into the more positive career that not necessarily more positive. I basically, I need to be doing the work. I can't, for me, it's not sustainable to be changing things in theory, even if we are. I mean, I need to be doing the work for myself. I just start to feel like a hypocrite if I'm not really on the ground, actually face to face with somebody doing the work. So it just got to the point where I just need to really put myself into that pretty much full time. So is that, but I'll just say along the way, I got to experience the pleasure of this great community forming of people who had not, had had their experiences ignored or invalidated for years. And then to be part of creating a space where they could say, yeah, that was real. I'm not crazy. That's pretty fundamental.
Sure. Yeah. No, I can relate a little to that feeling of, feeling like you're, like I mentioned, doing comedy, making jokes about mental health. And it's like, okay, how long am I just making jokes about this? Or like, could my time be better spent like doing, being part of the change kind of thing? So I can relate to that desire to like do the work.
We can talk sometime, maybe not right now, but we should talk about my theories about comedy.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to get heady about the meaning of humor and what makes people laugh and what a joke is. Sure, yeah, we'll definitely talk about it.
Oh yeah, we should have this conversation because it ties in to all this. Louisa just said I've been studying it since I was a baby.
Cool.
But I've been thinking about it, and I got some theories that are holding up over the years, but it ties it all in. It actually ties it into open dialogue. Actually, my theories started when I was watching an open dialogue. I can just say this now, edit or not, whatever you like.
Yeah, go for it.
This theory actually started when I was watching an open dialogue session in Tornio, because I couldn't understand the Finnish. All I could do was watch people, how they interacted. And I saw these little flutters of humor, arise. And you could see it ripple. And I actually have been thinking about this for a very long time. I actually used to go to movies like 3 times in a row just to watch what the audience did differently each time. And you could watch these ripples, like a flock of seagulls, go through the audience. And so I was watching that in the open dialogue session, and I just started thinking about what is this humor? Like people have referred to humor as something that you use in treatment, like it's a tool. But what I experienced in that room was more that it was a manifestation of something happening that was pretty intrinsic to the healing. And so the way I came to think of it is that you laugh when you suddenly realize what something looks like through somebody else's eyes. And at that moment, you realize, I'm not alone. And I'm not solely dependent on my own eyes and my own resources. And so there's something very fundamental to being human at that moment, which is that you realize that your experience is not comprised of just your own viewpoint. It's comprised of all the everybody else's eyes around you and everybody else's eyes in the world. And you could even go so far as to say it's everybody's eyes who have existed, because they've all contributed to our language and our thought and our culture, and we cannot separate ourselves from that. And humor somehow reminds us of that we are not independent in any way, that this illusion of self that is imposed on us, or that we mistakenly take on ourselves, is its own problem, is its own trap, its own prison. And most importantly, it's simply an illusion. It's not true. Everything we think, every word that we speak was created. Every word we speak was created by others. I'd say, sorry to have to tell you this, most things that you think have been thought before by others. And the great thing about that is realizing you're not on your own. You're just a part of it all. And when you really know that, you realize, I don't have to be lonely. Because I'm not alone. It's a tough thing to give up in our culture. But that comes back to what's joyous about working on relationships. I'll give you an example. Within the last couple of months, a guy came in to see me. Said, my marriage is over. My wife is done. She's gone. I just need to figure out how to manage to be a good father and maybe fix myself, maybe. And I said, yeah, okay, we can work on that if you like. Or we can shift your attention from what's wrong with you into the space between you and your wife and see what we can fix there. Maybe you'll get better that way. And maybe even she will too. And he said, nah, she'll never do it. She's done. She's gone. She'll never come. And I said, well, I don't necessarily need her to come here. We can just shift your focus into that space. And then maybe if we do that, maybe she'll come. Well, apparently he went home from that one session, walked into his house and looked at his wife in a way that she recognized as a look that she hadn't seen in a year and a half. And they had a long conversation at the end of which they hugged. And apparently their 4-year-old said, Mommy, Daddy hugged you in a way like he used to do when I was 3. And as far as I know, they haven't had a problem since. They've come in. They have come in as a couple several times. We've done work with them. It's been very good. Louise and I have worked with them. It's been really positive. There was a rough patch when something bad happened that was basically his fault. So we had to get through that. But we did. We shifted it from what was wrong with him to how can we all get together here, create a new future. And that's very different than what he came in with. So that was good. That was an example of something. I don't remember what it was an example of. Anyway.
Let me ask you this. In the writing on Mad in America, there's 2 things that I've seen you post a lot about. And one of them has to do with basically the drugging of children. I've seen you, a couple of the headlines of the articles you've written about, like the World Health Organization study finds worrying increase in prescribing antidepressants to youth. ADHD and antidepressants double risk of suicide in youth. Antipsychotics given to 68% of British with learning disabilities. Meta-analysis shows antidepressants offer little to no benefit to well-being of depressed children and adolescents. What have you learned from all these things that you've read, studied, and seen about the way that psychiatry and pharmaceuticals are being used on children?
What have I learned? It's criminal, literally. You might know that Joseph Biederman. Know about Joseph Biederman?
No.
He got in a bit of trouble. I don't remember. I think he eventually got out of the trouble. I think he landed okay. But the trouble he got into was because it came to light that he had gone to pharmaceutical companies and said, if you fund my research, I will create a market for you. I will create a market of childhood bipolar disorder, which hadn't existed before. And as a consequence of that, he succeeded. He made millions. And I'm laughing, but I feel tragic. It feels tragic. Because, he made millions, and probably millions of children have been put on drugs that there's really no evidence to support, and there's evidence against. Of course, it's an anatomy of an epidemic. People, children are put on this conveyor belt of medication, and it starts with ADHD, quote unquote ADHD. I see a lot of my job. A lot of times parents come in because they're worried that their child has ADHD. And my job is to convince them that they don't. And hopefully, keep them coming to therapy long enough that they really believe it rather than just go to somebody else who will diagnose the kid with ADHD. Yeah. And I'm looking pretty carefully at these kids. Kids who are kids. It's pretty clear. I mean, some of them, a lot of them foster kids who are just like, they're going through what you go through when your parents have failed you and, jettisoned you out into some stranger's home. I mean, how's that kid going to just be well adjusted? Those kids end up going into school and they can't concentrate. And anytime that anybody does anything to them that smells like rejection or disapproval, they can't handle it. And they just lose it. And then they come in looking for a parent, the foster parent will bring them in looking for an ADHD diagnosis. So my job is to hang in there long enough to help them learn how to just calm the kid down and give them what they always had needed, which was that kind of careful, close, very present attention. And plus also having to deal with behavior that can be really, really difficult to deal with. You don't want to dismiss it. But really realizing that what you need to do is step out of the loop like that and just give the kid what they actually need, which is the support and the care and the love. And sometimes clear boundaries. Yeah, that too. But anyway, so that's, I don't know if I think the sense of my response to what you asked should be coming through, which is that it's just so dicey to be giving drugs, diagnosing kids on the basis of non-existent or shaky evidence. Of course, we know that these drugs have not been tested on kids. A lot of the things that it's really a crime. I mean, I hate to, I don't usually, I like to find compassionate, sympathetic ways to say everything, and I don't think it's necessarily true that a doctor who prescribes these drugs is thinking criminally. I mean, I think they're either thinking this will help or they don't know what else to do, and for most of them, they don't have anything else to offer. So that's the reality. But as a society, we are criminally culpable, all of us, for the fact that, a few decades ago, we were telling people, don't take the easy route, don't take drugs. And then suddenly it became, everybody should take drugs. And, at the very least, even if we make an argument that these drugs can be or are helpful, even if we believe that to be absolutely true, and I accept that some people believe it, and there may be times that that's true. I accept that completely. Even then, we have an obligation to look at the same time at who is harmed. And it's very clear that there are at least a subset and perhaps a substantial number of our citizens whose lives are derailed, ruined, who suffer, people who die, people who kill. This is clear. I mean, this is not, I don't think it's even arguable. If you look at the statistics, if you look at the data, it just happens. It's on the label. The black box says aggression, suicidality. What those are code words for are the fact that in the studies of these drugs, people killed themselves who had no prior history of suicidality. People committed murder who had no prior history of violence. The link to the drug is clear, and that was hidden. It didn't come out until David Healy and his group did, the Freedom of Information and, got the data out. And then through long effort, got the study, got their review of the studies studied, published. And they didn't get that published until they found a conflict of interest in one of the legal firms representing the journal that had, previously failed to publish it. I mean, that's what it takes. Any narrative story published. So what we have is a data set that our society has relied on to justify drugging a generation of children and profiting off of the loss of their lives. If not literally, certainly the lives that they might have had otherwise. So that's how I feel about it.
Wow. You use the term criminal, and the next thing that I was going to ask you about is actually another thing you have written a lot about on Mad in America are all these different lawsuits that have been taking place against pharmaceutical companies. One of them, the headline is GSK to face class action lawsuit over antidepressants for children. If I remember correctly, Zyprexa, this is just going by my memory bank, Zyprexa, there was a massive lawsuit against Zyprexa for, like cross-marketing some of their drugs for children. I've seen you publish something you wrote on Mad in America about Janssen owing $70 million to a kid who grew breasts after taking risperidol. Eli Lilly facing a lawsuit over Cymbalta. Pfizer paying $300 million for false marketing claims. Johnson & Johnson, $1.2 billion judgment over risperidol. Teva paying $27 million over clozapine. What the hell is going on? I mean, there's all these things being published, all these lawsuits, all these companies, and they're paying out all this money. It's almost like it's just built into their business model as a business expense. Like what? I mean, you've seen a lot of these. You've written about them. What are your kind of thoughts and observations, and what can, I guess, be done, if anything?
Well, before I answer, let me ask a question. Do you like aspirin?
Do you like aspirin?
Yeah. Do you take aspirin?
I try not to try not to take anything, but I have taken aspirin before. If I have like the worst headache in the world, and I think that I won't get any sleep at all, and then I say, okay, I've got no sleep, and that'll cause some damage to me. I'll take this aspirin. I'll get sleep. It'll cause me damage, and so I don't like it, but I've taken it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so if you like aspirin, then you should be grateful for the fact that none of these suits are going anywhere, because if they did, the extent of the pharmaceutical company's culpability is so vast that we would have nobody left to buy aspirin from. They'd all be out of business. That's my opinion. I haven't run the numbers, but it's hard to imagine after I think that they, some of these lawsuits, it's great whenever these lawsuits, get traction or they even sometimes win. But $70 million is pocket change. It's a speeding ticket. And we all still speed, even after we get tickets, we keep speeding. It's no more than $70 million is no more than a speeding ticket. $1 billion is an inconvenience. And there have been $1 billion judgments. For things that when I started working in the field, I was seeing the people who were taking Seroquel, these young people it was my job to get them to continue taking it. And my argument would be like, the only way we get to keep working together is if you take it. So, sorry, but if we're working together, I'll be working to help you stop taking it. But that's the deal. Let's get out of it. They were crying. They were saying what it was doing to them. And then the doctors were saying, no, you're wrong. It's not doing that. Well, eventually there was $1 billion settlement for exactly what these kids were saying the drug was doing to them. Did it stop anything? No. The drug is still out there. And even recently, Seroquel, it's funny. Haha. At the time, the doctors who were arguing these kids they were saying, well, clearly, you're psychotic because somebody gave you Seroquel in the past. So, we don't take that's serious. And I said at times to these doctors, well, you understand that emergency rooms prescribe Seroquel for insomnia. I mean, it's on the record, and you don't know, it's not clear to me from the record that this person was ever psychotic. It could have been sleepless. And the doctors at first said, oh, no, that's not true. This is serious drugs. Nobody would prescribe it that way. And then I would say, you know that's not true, right? And they'd say, yes. Actually, yeah, you're right. And then recently I saw a headline about the fact that Seroquel is being prescribed for insomnia on a large scale, after $1 billion settlement for its negative effect. I mean, so yeah, it's out there, it's happening, but the motivate. I mean, I think the pharmaceuticals are in a death match. I mean, they're in a death struggle. It's existential. I can't believe that they don't know the effects. But if they let one lawsuit through, they're finished. So they got the resources. You know, this is the most successful marketing venture in history, and they got the resources. So, you know, it would be nice to think that we're going to win, but I can't. You can't think just about winning. You can only think about doing what you can, where you can. So every time I talk with a family about maybe your kid doesn't need to be on drugs forever, I consider that a win. But yeah, I mean, it's like there are heroes out there. You know, Jim Gottstein. You know Jim Gottstein? You know, he should be on the Mount Rushmore of, you know, this. And he got ruined. You know, he's a hero, and he got financially ruined. You know, it's just, you know, I think it's all well and good to admonish people to take stands, but you got to understand that people who take stands actually pay consequences, real ones.
In what way did he get ruined?
Oh, well, I mean, you know, the pharmaceutical companies went after him in every way they could. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I know that he went from being, you know, having means to having nothing. And I mean, I know some of the ins and outs. I don't want to say because some of them are personal, but that's the deal. You know, if you stand up and say, I will sacrifice everything for this cause, the world very likely will say, thank you, I'll take that deal. And you end up with nothing. So if we really want to get somewhere, we really have to honor the heroes, even when they're not perfect. You know, I mean, that's a lot of what goes on in this struggle. Is, you know, I mean, we're talking about a group of people who are defined by their lack of social ease. So, unfortunately, that ends up being applied to each other much more than to any common enemy. And I find that really hard and sad. I'm sure I'm guilty of it. I know I'm guilty of it myself, but it's hard. But I'm just saying, if you're bringing up the lawsuits, you gotta appreciate that anybody who brought one of those lawsuits risked everything to do it, and very likely lost everything. You know, there have been some victories, some, and I'm aware of some that are going on now, where people are, you know, they're going to the mat. They're doing it for the right reason, and they don't expect to come out with anything, and they probably won't. I don't know. I mean, yeah, but every victory is great. Every time, you know, that 70 million or whatever it was to that boy with breasts. But, you know, my partner Louise's son also grew breasts on the same drug. He didn't get any settlement, and he ended up dying. So, yeah, so it's mixed. You know, the victories are all mixed.
Wow. So, not sure where to go from here. That was the end of my questions. I feel like we ended up on a low note. Is there anything? Tell me what are you hopeful about as things are moving forward? What things do you see? You know, things heading in a positive direction, or some maybe changes, or what makes you optimistic and hopeful?
You know, we're still all human every day. And that includes, that includes a lot of things that we wish were different, but it also includes the potential for great beauty every day. And what I'm hopeful about meeting you. I mean, you're fantastic what you're doing, and I just enjoy your presence and look forward to whatever conversations might come in the future. So that's, it's like in the course of this, I mean, I met Louisa, my partner. I'd pretty much given up on meeting anybody. But I guess, you move in these circles and you're bound to meet somebody as weird as yourself. And that just might work out. And so I've met like all kinds of just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. I'm so grateful to know. As I actually happened to write to Jaakko Sekula, in Open Dialogue fame, in the course of a correspondence we were having. I wrote, I have touched great beauty in my life, largely because of your work. And so whatever else happens, I'm at peace with. And I think that's the thing. It's like if we think in terms of winning and beating an enemy here, I think we're consigning ourselves to ongoing pain. But I think if we commit ourselves not to being special, not to winning, not to ending this fight, but as realizing that this has been part of being human from the start, which is to figure out all the complexities and the vagaries and the inconveniences of being interdependent with each other. And possibly by doing that, also finding some great beauty along the way, then it's all worth it. So, I mean, for instance, I got into all this because I was furious. I was angry. And I'll have to say that the people that I was angry about trying to create a better future for are dead now. So I don't have that struggle to wage anymore. But along the way, I've met people like Bob Whitaker, who, I mean, he would dismiss this because he's struggling along with the rest of us. He struggles to feel good about himself and feel good about everything, the world. But I've just, I've had the pleasure of working for somebody who, contrary to every other employment situation I've had, only gets better with time. He, has like a knee-jerk reflex to forgive mistakes and seek learning from them. You don't do better than that. And it's amazing, as hard as he is on himself, and the evidence of that is how beautifully crafted his books are, is exactly as gracious and spacious and forgiving as he is to anybody I've seen him working, in a position of authority over. And so just to know that kind of thing exists is its own reward. So that's, I think what I'm coming down to is, the things I've learned, the philosophy I've learned, and the evidence that I've seen of, that great beauty that can arise between people when they learn how to make the space for it. That's what we hope for. If we're trying to create some perfect, idealized, future in which there is nothing we could call injustice, well, we're likely to be disappointed. But if we look next to ourselves, not ahead, but next to ourselves, for the people that we're entering the future with, rather than having some platonic, some idea of some unicorn we're going to find there, but rather put our focus on who we're venturing into the future with, then at least we're going to find ways to be happy along the way. I say this as somebody with a very strong knee-jerk reflex toward depression. So it's not I'm not blithe. It's not blithe. I'm being summoned. Yeah. I'm late for it. It's all right. It's fine. I'll go pay the same amount. Yeah, I'm late for something.
Well, that's perfect timing because, like I said, I've run out of questions to pick your mind with. Though I'd love to chat more with you about the theory of humor.
Welcome talking to you anytime. There was one story that I think was worth throwing out there.
Yeah, sure. Please share.
Because it happened today, and because you're looking for something to throw at the APA. So for whatever it's worth, I was talking with a client this morning who, I'm trying to remember what it was, but I mean, she's struggling with her relationship, whether to stay in it. And what I found myself saying was, the things that you're asking for in your relationship are exactly what any human being should be asking for in any relationship. And what's hard is that you're being called crazy. And what's harder still is that the person who's calling you crazy has a lot of other people who would back him up and agree with him based on some of what's happened, I think, as a result of being in this relationship. So that's a hard part. So what I can offer is that, from my perspective, I would call his behavior towards you abusive, because you're being called crazy simply for asking for what you have a right for. And that's not okay. That's not sustainable. And as I say this, I'm thinking this applies to all, not all, but this applies to many relationships that we find in the psychiatric world. I would define the way people who are being called crazy, that is abuse. To say that somebody's asking, people who are just asking for what humans need, that's abusive. And I just can't, we can't really just forgive the field of psychiatry any more than we just forgive an abusive partner. We might understand it. We might work with them. We might seek healing. But the fact is, abuse has happened. And you have to help the people. You have an obligation. I mean, I consider myself lucky. Like I said, I've never done anything I wasn't forced to do. But I'm lucky that way. But I feel like I have a debt to people who weren't as lucky. So that's what, it was basically what I was trying to communicate to my client. You are not crazy. Anybody who's, your partner is calling you crazy, but I'm the professional. So it's official. You are not crazy. You are only asking for things that people need. And any behavior that has been called crazy came out of the fact that you weren't getting that. So, now, of course, people in the AP, there may be psychiatrists who hear that and say, oh, well, you're dealing with, somebody with the equivalent of a cold. I mean, we'll deal with the hard stuff. Thanks for your ignorant input, they might say. But, the stuff I've dealt with is as hard as the stuff anybody's dealt with. I put my clinical record up against anybody. I've dealt with situations that were as hard as they get. And, throw any definition of that at me and I can meet it in terms of how the potential lethality of the situation and the actual lethality of the situation. So I've earned the right to say it's not right to call somebody crazy for asking for things that human beings need. So for me this morning, just being able to say that to this woman and feel that it was going to make a difference, that was a win. I don't need to win the war. We'll just go one battle at a time. That's my last.
That's great. I'm glad that we added that into the end.
All right. Well, again, I think you're great, and look forward to talking to you more another time. I'll connect you up with Sasha and anybody else that you think of that you might like.
Okay. Sounds good, Kermit. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.